Hello and welcome to the interview. I'm Annette Young. In recent days, Britain has been dealing with the aftermath of the worst terrorist attacks seen in the country since 2005. 22 people were killed and 66 others injured when British-born Salman Abedi blew himself up at the Arena venue in Manchester just as a concert was ending. Still, one thing is for certain. Western European cities are becoming regular targets, especially in the last 2 years. This as we witnessed the rise of the Islamic State group and its calls for supporters to strike anywhere they can and with whatever weapons are at hand. Joining me now is Daveed Gartenstein-Ross, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for being with us. We're seeing a spike in terrorist attacks in the last few years, and as you wrote recently, it follows the Arab uprisings, which of course has given jihadists a massive boost. But it appears, however, that security agencies have failed to see this connection.
Well, I think for security agencies, you can divide it up into two different points. There's the people who were responsible for strategic intelligence back in 2011, where there was an immediate misreading. This is something that Michael Morrell, for example, who was the deputy director of CIA, has admitted to. But for security services in Europe, for example, who are trying to stop the various plots, they don't see any ambiguity. For some time, they've been waving their hands and saying that there is way more extremist activity than they could possibly be expected to keep track of. And unfortunately, we're seeing the deadly fruits of that now.
So what you have been saying is that there was sort of rather premature rejoicing at the seeming demise of al-Qaeda back in 2011.
Yes, absolutely there was. And that's what I mean at a strategic level. I would divide security services and intelligence agencies more broadly into two different functions. This is speaking at a broad generality. There's tactical intelligence and then there's strategic intelligence. At a tactical level, intelligence services are very, very good. They have a hard job given to them. Then there's strategic intelligence, where generally speaking, not just intelligence services, but writ large, people in the public sphere and others are quite poor at forecasting. There's a variety of reasons why that's the case, but that's an area where I think that various Western countries need to focus on doing better, because a lot of investments or strategic decisions, such as the decision to intervene in Libya, are based around our understanding of the way that the world is going. And clearly, for Libya, which has a tragic connection to the Manchester bombing, there is a massive underestimation of the problems that would be unleashed by that intervention.
I want to come back to Libya in a moment, but I want to ask you, why are we seeing so many more such attacks?
Various reasons, but I think the biggest is probably the Syria conflict. In Syria, you have this open battlefield where ISIS has managed to declare its caliphate. You have a massive al-Qaeda problem there as well. And just generally a humanitarian disaster with hundreds of thousands killed. It's the kind of conflict that both militant groups can exploit and that can engender passions and ultimately some radicalization. One other reason, which I've pointed to, is that militant organizations are innovative organizations. They look for openings and they are very good at exploiting them. Here they had something that they were able to exploit.
And it appears as a result governments are on the back foot, especially given that so many of these attackers are homegrown.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. You have both a lot of homegrown attackers. You have a wave of people who are getting out of prison who were involved in militant activities 7 to 10 years ago, who are reconstituting. Most of them return from prison unrepentant, though there are some exceptions. And in addition to that, you have the refugee crisis, which ISIS at some points has been able to exploit, both in encouraging some refugees to attack. We've seen that in Germany, for example, and also inserting operatives into the flows of refugees. That happened with several of the Paris attackers. So there's this very difficult strategic situation. Intelligence agencies were behind in the first instance. And on top of all of that, their superiority in electronic surveillance has been massively diminished in the post-Edward Snowden era. It used to be that they couldn't possibly be expected to engage in human surveillance around the clock, but they would rely on their SIGINT capabilities to keep track of possible extremists. Now, with the boom in end-to-end encryption, that advantage has dried up.
And the other thing is that we're sort of seeing more and more soft targets, and particularly the locations, because it no longer appears to be just capital cities that are being targeted, but regional centres as well, such as Nice or Manchester.
Yeah, and one of the signals being sent there is that no place is safe. If you look back to when it was just capital cities and we knew these attacks by names like 7/7 or 3/11, back in those days you had a lot of danger, but you had a thinner pool of people willing to carry out attacks. There's been kind of a normalization of jihad. That is, 10, 15 years ago, a lot of these plots would feature figures who were known as spiritual sanctioners, who would help plotters to believe that there was a religious justification for their actions. At this point, with a lot of cells, they don't need a spiritual sanctioner. They just take for granted that what they're doing is right, or that it's sanctioned, without having to have someone in that particular persuasive role.
Now, coming back to that Libyan connection with the Manchester attack, it's also serving as a reminder that Libya is fast becoming a major source of concern for European leaders, given the ongoing chaos, which is always fertile territory for jihadists, and also its proximity to Europe.
That's absolutely correct. Fortunately, ISIS, though it controlled the city of Sirte, lost control of it fairly recently. Its foreign fighters, however, are scattering, and it's going to be worth watching where they try to reestablish themselves. You still have a big al-Qaeda presence in Libya, which people take less seriously, and you have borders that have completely collapsed, which allows all variety of different people and organizations to move through, ranging from militant organizations to economic migrants or refugees, drug trafficking organization, human smugglers. All of these have a heavy footprint in Libya and are having an impact to this day on Europe.
And again, as you've pointed out, technological advances such as 3D printing and drones could easily be used increasingly in attacks on Western targets. What can governments do in order to sort of fight back, given the use of that technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, ultimately, what we're moving into is a world where, unfortunately, a capability to kill lots of people grows every single year. You have massive improvements in civilian technology that militant organizations can figure out how to exploit. For government's part, one thing I'm a big advocate of is looking at the structure of government and are we well set up to deal with this problem. We tend to innovate less faster than bad guys do. And I think, to me, I'm an advocate of within government, basically startup cells in government, something that can debureaucratize cells that have specific purposes, but so you can get the same sort of debureaucratized structure that militant groups have. That's one thing we can do at a structural level, but looking at the entire way that our bureaucracies are set up, in Europe, for example, where you have places with multiple competing intelligence agencies with responsibility for different parts of a city, it's really hard to police that way. And so I think looking at the organizational design of how we try to disrupt plots is actually a really important part. People underestimate the importance of organizational design.
Now, politicians are clearly struggling with this issue, but is there any political leader anywhere in the globe capable of rising to the situation and able to offer constructive, or rather a constructive roadmap on how to deal with terrorism?
That's a great question. I think that in certain countries you have politicians who either face less of a problem or who have a handle on the situation. But for countries where you have a large and growing problem set, you have a few things where politicians are working on best practices. We've seen, for example, in certain places that countering violent extremism, or CVE, has had a few demonstrated successes. In Europe, actually, has seen a few areas where CVE has produced a massive reduction in the amount of foreign fighters going abroad from certain cities. So you do have some best practices emerging. Ultimately, I think this isn't the kind of thing where you'll have a politician who has all the answers, but rather, to me, the best answer comes with allowing specialists to unleash their creativity in ways that are equally creative to the kind of innovations that we're seeing from groups that are trying to kill us.
Do you believe that governments are now starting to listen to all of this, Daveed?
I think they've been listening for a while. I think generally speaking, everyone wants solutions. I think there was a lull period, maybe through 2013, from say 2010 or 2011 through 2013, where people were very hopeful that this problem might be solved. But we've seen such a spike in recent years that, from the November 2015 Paris attacks on, I think people are ready to listen. For the deeper issue of are our bureaucracies designed to innovate fast enough? That's much harder to disentangle, and I don't think that we have a lot of movement in that regard. But with respect to specialists having the ear of politicians or having the ear of those within government bureaucracies, I think that is the case today.
Daveed, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure joining you.
And that's it for the France 24 interview. Do stay with us here, as there will be more news and headlines coming up very shortly.